You know what's a great dividend ETF that often unfortunately gets overshadowed and doesn't get the attention it deserves, even from a channel like mine? Dgro. This is from iShares, and if we look at this list of dividend ETFs in order of its assets under management, it's actually right there behind SCHD. But I'm sure that the vast majority of you guys watching this video invest in SCHD over Dgro. So the goal behind this video is to take a deeper dive into Dgro and compare it to SCHD to see which one you should be investing in and exactly in what scenarios is one ETF preferable over the other. And if you guys enjoy what I do here on YouTube, let me know. Leave a like, subscribe, all that kind of YouTube stuff. I greatly appreciate it. But let's get started. Okay, so in terms of raw performance, this is what it looks like over the past 5 years. SCHD is in blue and Dgro is in yellow. Keep in mind, this is just the price history of these two assets, and SCHD outperformed by 1%. But I do want to draw your attention to before 2020, because here Dgro slightly outperformed SCHD on a pretty consistent basis. However, more recently, SCHD has indeed taken the lead over Dgro in terms of its price action. Now, the other portion of the return, being that these are dividend-focused ETFs, is the direct dividend payments. And here, Dgro has a current dividend yield of 2.27% with a 5-year growth rate over 10%. And if we do the same comparison for SCHD, here the dividend yield is 3.2% with a 12.3% dividend growth rate. So in terms of the yield, both of these ETFs have a yield way above the average that of the market, and both of them have a dividend growth rate in the double digits, which is phenomenal. All right, now combining the price action with the dividend to give us the total return, this is what it looks like going back all the way to the end of 2014. And the CAGR over this time is very similar between the two, but technically, SCHD has the slight lead. Although something to point out here is that when it comes to the returns of the worst year, Dgro has fared a lot better, and in a second we're going to talk about why that's potentially the case. And finally, we have the income level, and as we saw previously with the dividend yield, SCHD does have the lead here, and their dividend growth rate is a little bit faster, and that's why the gap here does widen over time. Okay, so that's the historical performance, and they're both great and neck, and that kind of explains why they're both extremely popular dividend ETFs. Even against the S&P 500, the returns and the overall CAGR are very competitive, which is extremely impressive for a dividend ETF. But being that the performance is so similar between these two ETFs is not enough of a differentiating feature, and thus we have to dig a little bit deeper to see which one of these funds better fits your investing situation. So let's begin with the basic insights for each ETF. Dgro offers a straightforward execution of a dividend growth strategy. The fund aims to find stocks that pay steadily increasing dividends by requiring a 5-year track record of increasing dividends while ensuring that the firm pay out no more than 75% of earnings. Now, in comparison to that, we have SCHD. So this is a market cap weight fund whose selection universe only includes firms with a 10-year history of paying dividends. Within that universe, SCHD uses fundamental screens, cash flow to debt, return on equity, dividend yield, and dividend growth rate to build its portfolio. The objective is to focus on quality companies with sustainable dividends. So right there, we can identify some major differences between these two funds. The biggest difference by far, in my view, is that SCHD requires a 10-year history of paying dividends, and Dgro only requires 5 years of increasing dividend payments. And then the next step in the process for SCHD to ensure quality of the picks is things like cash flow to debt, return on equity, and the dividend growth rate. This is when that comes into play. And Dgro is way more simple in nature, requiring that the payout ratio is below 75%. Okay, the next thing we can look at is to see how the above screens affect the actual composition of these funds. The first thing to point out is that Dgro is way more broad in nature, with 416 holdings with an expense ratio of 0.08. In comparison to that, SCHD has 101 holdings at the current moment with an expense ratio of 0.06%. And coming back to Dgro, this is the sector allocation, and I want to point out that technology and healthcare are two very large sectors in Dgro, and SCHD in comparison also has financials as their number 1 holding, but technology and healthcare is a bit further down on the list. You're looking at the top 10 holdings for Dgro, and these are the top 10 holdings for SCHD. There's definitely a lot of overlap here, like Pfizer, Coca-Cola, Merck & Co., but a big difference is that DGRO has Apple and Microsoft as major holdings. I also like this piece of data right here because it breaks down the difference between large cap value and large cap growth. And as evident in the holdings above, DGRO has a slightly higher focus on large cap growth versus SCHD. And finally, if this matters to you, there's a 27% commonality between these two ETFs. Okay, so that's all the heavy data between these two funds, and if you guys are still watching, you are definitely an extreme finance nerd. But the question still remains, which one of these funds is better for different people? So my ultimate conclusion here is that SCHD is a better pure dividend play, and DGRO is slightly better as a core position in a greater dividend portfolio. Because if you compare these against the S&P 500, DGRO has a lot more in common versus SCHD. Now to finish off this video, I have two sample portfolios of how I think you can use both these ETFs to their maximum potential. So in this sample portfolio, we have 4 holdings. 2 of them are growth and 2 of them are dividend/value. And the only difference here is that for the dividend half, one uses DGRO and the other SCHD. The other dividend play for both is Divo, and their growth ETFs are VUG and BST. And in this kind of a scenario where it's either DGRO or SCHD, in my view, SCHD is the clear winner. And that's simply because, as we saw before, SCHD has slightly better performance as well as a higher dividend yield. And that's why here in Portfolio 2, the returns are ever so slightly better, but the major difference is the income of the portfolio, and here SCHD is just a better choice. Now in contrast to that, a portfolio setup like this is where DGRO can really shine. So this portfolio setup is way more simple. We have a core position followed by one value and one growth ETF. In Portfolio 2, we have the S&P 500 as the core position, followed by SCHD as the value, and VUG as the growth. But in Portfolio 1, we can take advantage of DGRO being way more diversified than SCHD and make that the core position. Then that opens up the value spot for Divo, which has a very high dividend yield, and the growth ETF is the same. In terms of the total return, the second portfolio does perform slightly better, but the major difference is the income level. So the ability to use a very diversified dividend ETF as the core, as well as combining it with a high yield fund like Divo, really does a lot to boost the income level of a portfolio. So that's my take on these two very popular and very well performing dividend ETFs. I think they're both extremely high quality and deserve to be this popular. And to put it simply, if you're going to choose one or the other, I think SCHD does have ever so slightly better performance. But keep in mind, DGRO is way more diversified of a dividend ETF, potentially allowing it to be a core position inside of a dividend-focused portfolio and help to raise the overall dividend yield. But let me know in the comments down below what you think of these two funds, which is your favorite and which do you invest in? If you guys are still watching and enjoyed the video, give it a like, subscribe, all that kind of YouTube stuff. I do greatly appreciate it. But regardless, I'll see you guys in the next one.